All right, we're live. Okay, thank you all for joining. Today's training is our trust verification process. I will be leading most of the training, but Andrew will be assisting me as well on the back end. All right, so first things first, I'm going to share my screen and we'll walk through it together. Okay. So an overview of how the trust verification process works is we have it broken down into 3 categories. First one being sending the initial information to the trust manufacturer for what we need. The second step is the trust manufacturer puts that information together into a packet and sends it to us to review and approve, which is when we do our sign off. And then the last part of that is the trusses are done, they're getting delivered, and we receive the seals from the manufacturer and we submit that packet to the county for approval. So 3 steps, okay? All of the steps don't apply to everyone on this call, but I thought it would be important for everyone to be aware of how the process works. First step is sending the information to trust manufacturer. I worked a little bit with Steve from Better Living on this, since we use their company pretty often. And some of the information they're usually looking for from what we send them is location of the building site, what kind of building it is, and this just helps them to determine the codes that are necessary or design parameters that will apply. Second thing they look for is building layout. It helps them figure out like the size of the building, truss spacing, and they input all of that into their digital truss program that they use that spits out their drawings. Third thing they look for is the types of trusses. There's so many different kinds of trusses out there. What they want to know is it structural? Is it not? Is it a gable piece? Does it need to have a wall underneath it? What kind of support does it need? They need to know that. And then they want to know the roof pitch / overhang. And this just helps them with the slope of the trusses. The overhang is what our soffits will be attached to. They want to know the truss loading, which is like what materials or load the trusses will be required to hold. Typically in our line of work, it's usually just decking and shingles, but they need to know that information. And then last but not least, they want to know if we're matching an existing trussed roof or if it's just a freestanding structure. We're matching an existing truss roof. There's 4 dimensions they have to have, is the existing span, overall height, pitch, and hill height, like he went over with us in our training, and I'll show you a diagram later on in the end about why that's important. So they need all this information. Usually they can get all of this out of our building plans. So when we submit the initial request for a truss order, we're sending them our permit drawings, and occasionally that's accompanied by any kind of sketches or layout, like truss sketches or layouts that we can send if it's something particular that we want them to see. So as long as we send them those drawings, they can get that information off of there. If there's any additional information required, they'll ask for it. Typically, Claudio is the lead on sending this information over to them, but just so everyone's aware of how the process works. Next steps. After the truss company has received our package, they use their systems to put a packet together for us to review. In that packet, you'll see a cover page that lets you know the quantity of the trusses, the different kinds that we're getting, and the total price, so the total cost of everything. That'll be on the cover page. And then as you go further into the packet, you'll start to see drawings of the different trusses. So if there's 4, 5, or 6 trusses, you'll see each of them. Truss 1 will probably be labeled T01 or T1G. There's different ways that they label it. And then it'll have dimensions on them, slopes, all the different dimensions that we might look for will be on each page. The first thing that we want to do in production is we want to review the truss layout and drawings. First of all, we want to make sure it's accurate. It's the same project, that we didn't get the wrong thing. Right? So we make sure it's accurate. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to verify that we're getting the right truss type for each location. So if there's vaulted ceilings in a certain room, we want to make sure that we have the right trusses for vaulted ceilings in that section and they haven't sent us the wrong thing. If it needs to be a structural truss versus a gable end, we just want to make sure that all of those things are accurate and in the right location. The next thing we want to verify is quantity per truss. If we're getting 4 scissor trusses, we want to make sure that's quantity 4 of those, just to make sure that that's accurate and something was not missed by the manufacturer. So we're verifying those things. And then the most important verification, I think, is the filled measurements. We want to make sure that those have been accurately transferred over to the truss drawings and no mistakes have been made there. So we verify those usually in the field with the lead carpenter. And then once all of those things are verified, confirmed as accurate, we will do a final sign off, which is saying, yes, we approve this truss layout and this truss drawings. We will sign that off and then send that back to the manufacturer. And that consists of our truss order being placed. So who's responsible for doing these things? The majority of the sign off for the production department will be done by the project manager. He's going to work closely with the lead carpenter to do all the verifications, measurements, truss types, quantity, layout. He'll work closely with the lead carpenter to do that. Currently, because we're not 100% technically skilled in trusses, we're having the general manager, Mark, I just volunteered you, do a final review before that goes out. This is just a temporary situation until the PMs are confident in doing our final sign-offs. That's just one last set of eyes to take a look at everything and make sure we didn't miss anything. So that step right there is temporary. It will change eventually. But right now we have the GM doing that. When the truss order is placed, what that consists of is the PD signing off on the packet that was sent to us by the manufacturer, which includes price. We're agreeing to the price that they're sending us, and we're agreeing that this is the final measurements and everything. Edits happen prior to that final sign off, and it's just the same process. If we catch something that we need to change, we send it back to the truss company. They make the edits. They send us a new packet that's revised. We look it over back and forth until we get to the final where we want it to be. When we have that final, we want the project manager on this checkoff list to sign and date that he verified these things. And the project developer, when she places the truss order, to sign and date as well, that the order has been placed. Okay. So step 3 of the truss orders is that we have now received our delivery from the truss company. The trusses have been manufactured, they've been made, and they've been delivered to the job site. Shortly after, it's usually within a couple of days, we get the truss packet with seals from the manufacturer. This packet gets submitted to the county where we're doing that project for approval, and is usually handled by the project developer. The county is pretty good about turning that approval around in about a week or so. We receive the approval back from the county, and then it is up to the project manager to make sure that the approved packet is on the job site prior to our framing inspection. Usually the county inspector will look for that to be on the job site when they're doing their inspection of our framing. So that's really important. There's also a sign off here to make sure that all those items were checked off and completed and dated. Okay. So that's the quick version of the 3-step process for our approval. For the PMs, there's an additional form that accompanies this sign off. And that form looks something like this. It basically just breaks down what measurements we need to verify, and it has different fields where you can put in the measurements and confirm that you verified them. You'll have a second sheet that shows you an example of, like, if we're asking you to measure the span, here's the bottom chord length. This is where it is. This is the hill to peak left, hill to peak right, overall height. It shows you exactly where those things are so that you're confident when you're taking your measurements. And there'll be more examples of different truss types added to this. You don't need to turn this sheet in. This is just for your reference. It also has some terminology in here that's a guide, so you know what those terms mean and what we're asking for. But basically, it's super helpful because with the numbers, you can just go and say, number 3, overall height, that needs to go in the number 3 column. From the bottom, the chord to peak, and then you can put your measurement in here. This sheet gets filled out and you can upload this page, just the page with the measurements, signed and dated at the bottom, to the Slack channel. And that way we have it stored there if we ever need to access it. And this is just a guide to help you make sure that you don't miss any of your measurements. Okay. Any questions about this sheet or the process so far?
Lima, can you please revise this sheet, because I just got a call from an inspector in the meantime, so I just had to attend that.
Or you want me to go over this sheet again?
Yeah, just this sheet before,
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So this sheet, in addition to the other checklist, this sheet accompanies that. Basically what it is for the field verification. It has an example on the second page of what measurements we're looking for you to verify, for the PMs to verify. And it has them numbered so that you know exactly where to take your measurements. And it's all at the bottom. You don't need to turn in the second page of the sheet. It's just a guide to help you know what to measure, but you do need to fill out page 1 of the sheet, which is very clear, length of the bottom chord, number 1. You can reference that diagram there, and that's number 1, that's what they're needing. And then you can go in and fill in all your measurements in the sheet, sign and date it at the bottom, and upload it into the Slack channel.
Gotcha.
Pretty straightforward.
Yep.
This is just to make sure that we didn't miss any of the measurements that we need to verify in the field. And usually your lead carpenter will do this with you, but you would be responsible for assigning it and uploading it.
And hopefully the lead carpenter holds the tape measure, and then, we can coordinate who's gonna go with which end.
Yeah, just don't fall off the roof and create a skylight. Safety protocols. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Who is the keeper of this checklist? The keeper of this checklist is the PDs. Yay. They're responsible for making sure that all of these steps are done. That does not mean that they're responsible for doing the steps. They still have to work with Claudio. They still have to work with the project managers to make sure that these steps are completed. The project manager will be the one who is responsible for meeting those deadlines. So you know your construction schedule, you know when you need to have the trusses on site, you know what the turnaround time for trusses are, which is usually 2 to 3 weeks. We don't want the project to be stalled, so you know the deadline when you absolutely have to get these things to the PDs by. So you'd be working closely with them to do that. Questions so far? Claudia?
Quick question about the last step, submission to the county. I know this says completed by project developer, but when you say working with the design, it means the project development needs to make sure that it's always up to us anyway to submit to the county the trust package, or eventually it's going to be just Elizabeth and or Ariel, for example, or it's both together.
So the way that we have it working right now is the PDs submit them for their projects, for their individual projects. So if it's an Elizabeth project, she would submit it. And if it's an aerial project, she would submit it. The trust company sends it to the PDs because they receive their orders from the PDs. So they send it back that way. The PDs get it. And the process for submittal is different for each county, but for the most part, it's similar. You can do it online usually, and then just go submit the packet to them. They review it, they approve it within a week or so, send it right back to us, and then we just have to get it on the job site.
Okay. No, I agree with you. Arlington County is going to be much different from First County when it's time and Elizabeth needs some instructions or Ariel. I'm happy to coordinate, the first, stuff.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Andrew?
Yes.
You look like you had a question. You unmuted yourself.
I assumed that you were going to tell me to start speaking at some point.
Yes, you're right on cue. So Andrew is going to demonstrate for us like a Truss approval that we just did, I think a couple weeks ago for the Truss project. He's going to go through that with us, what that looks like.
Yes, you're going to have to speak up a little bit because I'm on site and it's windy here, 40 degrees cold, bundled up. Let's back up for a second. So let's just go the overall process and we'll dive into that. So the overall process is we come up with some sort of addition that a client's looking for. And then after that roof line has kind of been approved, then we send that over to the trust company. They give us a preliminary quote for that project. In order to sign off on that quote, then we need to do a verification. Once we do that verification, that's when the PDs would line it up of when we need to order that based on when we need it on site. So then we can get those trusses delivered, and when they get delivered, then we get that drawings with the seal and we submit that to the county. So that's the full circle of what would take place. And we know that the process of doing this is super important because we need to make sure that the trusses are accurate. We were all part of Steve's training, and you can't go back and modify things, so you've got to make sure it's accurate from the get-go. But there are other components to the truss packages that we get that can be modified. So like if we get I-joists or something like that, as opposed to the trusses itself. But the verification process we have is going to be for trusses. So that's when, that's what I'll dive into now. One last thing on that is, so in order to confirm the measurements of this verification, we have included in the trade walk package, when the project manager goes on site as part of their checklist, they can get their head wrapped around the project and then determine when the sign off should be done, when the measurement should be done. Should they be done that day at trade walk? Should that be when prior to job start, when we take a field trip and go on site, meaning both of those would be before job start, meaning that the trusses need to get ordered prior to job start because they're needed that early in the project with a 2 to 3 week average lead time. Or what more traditionally happens is the measurements and the verifications can take place after project start or at project start. That way the lead carpenter's on site and starting all the tasks, and they've already dove into that project so they can do the verification at that time. So those are the 3 steps, but the project manager determines that at trade walk of when that should take place, and then lets the PDs know kind of what the game plan is. So going into the files that we get, once we do the design and send it over to the trust company, they'll give us a couple of files. Most of the time it's 2 separate files that really take place. One's going to be a Excel document and one's a PDF. The Excel document is going to be the quote. So the quote is going to have kind of basically roof trusses at X dollar amount, and then here's the I-joist, which is going to be the floor frame, is at this dollar amount. Sometimes that's a little tricky and it doesn't say it anywhere else. That's why we need to always look at this quote. Is sometimes they'll have the hardware included, sometimes they won't. Sometimes there's LVLs included in that quote, sometimes there's not. And sometimes there's different parts and pieces. So we just want to be clear, because we're typically getting this preliminary quote prior to contract. So we want to make sure whatever's in there is, you know, relatively accurate. So when we compile the estimate, it's as accurate as we can make it. So in this particular scenario, we're just going to be looking at the roof trusses, even though I'll dabble into the I-joists as well. So the other file that comes with it is going to be a PDF, which is going to do layouts. So the layout file looks something along the lines of this. And this is going to show all of the different trusses that we have. So then you can go reference these truss numbers and everything like that. And you can see that the back trusses and the front trusses are similar. We can go look at what those look like. And then we have a different set of trusses, 3 different trusses in the middle. And then even the front truss and the rear truss are the same, or they're TO1. So they're their own separate trusses, but they're their own. So we'll go take a look at what those look like.
Andrew, just for clarity, when you say trusses are the same, how do you know? Is that because they have the same number, like TO1?
That's right. So there's a T104, or sorry, TO4, and there's 8 of them, and there's TO4s here, and there's 3 of them. So we know that they're the same number. So there, you can reference that page, and I'll do that. But that's basically the coding number and the quantity. We know from this particular project, this is a right side addition. So this is all open space. And then this is going to be attached to the house. So we're going to have some sort of no overhangs on this side, and we should have overhangs on this side. So that also plays into what we're looking for. There's no addition or existing house in the front. So we should see some sort of overhangs in the front and the rear and everything like that. Put it into context. Normally when we're reviewing this, and I don't have it up now, we also want to have whatever the up-to-date drawings are. So if we get this at trade walk, we're looking at trade walk. If it's at the actual field verification process, we at minimum would then have contract docs, but we probably have permit or CDs if that's all the way up to project start. So we'd want to reference the CDs because those would be the most up-to-date and the most detailed plans that we have. Also with this then would be the floor layout. So this would be all the I-joists that would go with this project. Not going to go over the I-joists today, but that's what that looks like. So going to what the trusses look like, we need to reference back and forth those. We know that the TO1s, by looking at the layout, was the gable ends. And we know that they are, the rear has, by looking at the CDs, we know that in that plan has big upper transom windows, rectangular traps, whatever the layout that those have. That means that we have to have it as a cathedral gable end in order to get the windows up high. That's one sticking point, or one tricky point that goes into it, because the standard package is going to be gable end trusses most of the time that the truss company puts in. So we really need to validate where they have cathedral ceilings or cathedral trusses where we need them. So this would be the gable end. We know on the front of this addition, there are not high transoms up there. So we could go with a gable end. For simplicity, I believe we move forward on just doing the trade truss on both, or the cathedral truss on both.
What is the difference between a gable end versus a regular truss?
I think that goes to your reference sheet, but I won't draw it on here, but it would make it so that a gable end truss would be sitting on a load-bearing wall, as opposed to like a free spanning truss like this is, where all the load is on the right side and the left side. But a gable end would need equal distribution of the weight all the way across.
Awesome.
So when you have headers, if you have a gable end truss, you need to put headers above your window because there's load coming down. When you have some sort of scissor truss or some sort of free spanning truss instead, then there's no load coming down that wall. You do not need headers on that rear unless it's needed for rigidity purposes for wind bracing or something like that. So going to the next truss of what that looks, so when verifying it, of course, going to Salima's reference sheet, that we need to look at the span all the way across and heel heights and everything like that to make sure it works. We need to look at the CDs to make sure that the inside pitch that is proposed to the clients is matching what the truss company can do. So it's an 8-on-12 on the outside and a 6-on-12 on the inside. Make sure that those are correct and will work. Mm-hmm. If the truss company can't get to what it is that's proposing, that information needs to get back to design so they either can inform the client or adjust what they need to adjust in order to make sure all expectations are set properly. Scrolling to the next truss, these are the TO2s. This is going to be the ones that are going to be running across the main part of the cathedral in the front and the back rooms. That's a bedroom and a study. So this is just, they're going to be cathedral. You can kind of look at what takes place from having the overhangs. That's in this particular case, in this particular layout, there's overhangs that take place. I'm sorry, it's just in the front because there's nothing attached to it. So there's overhangs on both sides. That's what makes this truss a little different than the other trusses. So go to the nuance to make sure those trusses are correct. That's one, like this area is a little bit of complexity in the project because it's different of how the roof ties in right here in this corner compared to all the rest of them. So I'm going to go to the TO4s next. The TO3 is the same as the TO2. It needs to be analyzed because that's a little different. The TO4s, this is going to be the bulk of most of the projects. The thing to note about Better Living, and when they quote theirs, is the truss elevation that we're looking at is from rear to front. And that is very important because it looks opposite. So even though the layout they give us is from front to back, just like standard most all drawings, the elevations are all rear to front. So therefore the side that wants the overhang is on the right side of the house, which would make it the left side of these drawings. That's why there's an overhang on this side, but you can see that this is the side that would sit on the house. So that's why there's no extended overhang from there. So scrolling down in the middle of this, this layout, so in the bulk of this where the purple is, we're looking at 3 different kinds of trusses. So we just want to verify that. We know that it's supposed to be a storage truss, a storage truss for this particular house. So they want the storage. We also know that that is not going to be a scuttle hole to get up in there. That would be a side access that's accessible from one of the scissor trusses. So we just want to make sure that clearances work and it'll make, we can put a door here to make it accessible. But ultimately it comes in and it should be the same layout from width, from the total span for these, and heights and pitches should be the same. And then you kind of look and just make sure that all the different clearances will work. Scrolling down, that should be the end of them. This should be 3 different storage trusses as we see on the layout. So then going through this process, then we would reference Salima's checkoff to get all the measurements. and then just looking at it from an overall standpoint of how is this going to get built, how is it all going to get put together, can be done from the sheet.
Andrew, please, a quick question. So when we prepare a cost estimate right before our first design presentation, and let's assume that our project has a pre-engineered trusses, do we do a rough cost estimate in-house?
Good question. There's a couple of different ways that's done. So normally if we're doing an estimate at the design agreement, it's going to be based on this assumed size, assumed layout that'll take place. And then we have assumed cost per truss. So we try to make a guesstimate of how large that addition is going to be, which would necessitate a certain number of trusses at a certain rate, which would equal a total amount of trusses. Then by the time we get all the way through the process and we get the plans developed and we go to executive summary, we should have had the preliminary truss quote completed, sent over from the designer to the truss company, and the truss company gets back to the designer so that the PD has that information. So in combination, so the designer and the PD work together to get that quote. And then it just needs at least one verification that just the overall makes sense, like that is buildable. The whole component of the truss package works with that project, even though the details and the sign off wouldn't be done at that time. But that at least makes sure that the actual package is valid, and the estimate to go with that, the quote to go with that package is then put into the estimate for the client.
Thank you.
Okay, so Andrew, if we had to add that one step.
Which step is that?
The overall buildability of it, I'm assuming that happens before it ever gets to production for sign off.
Correct.
So maybe that goes somewhere here. Is that a sign off for Claudio, for sales? Who does that sign off or that verification?
Well, ultimately, this is just the truss verification process, which is going to be once we are signing off on the project.
Correct.
This process does not start from the beginning, which is how do we get a quote enough to go to contract? So if we want to create a separate process for that, we can, but my suggestion would be not to cloud the actual truss sign off with that.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Find that in next year's updates.
2022. All right, cool. Thank you for that. PDs, any question about your role?
No.
All right, awesome. Claire, PMs?
No.
No.
All right, Claudio?
So I think we should go through this a few times and then give us feedback on how you want revisions. It'll be an active document, so let us know.
Yep, absolutely. So
Okay.
what I'll do is I'll send a follow-up email after this training that includes the video, or includes a link to the video and includes this document. Please redline it. If there's something you think we've missed or something that makes more sense, please send feedback back so that we can get a final version out.
Yeah, I want to make sure Mark's okay. You told him he had to verify it, and he's been giving you the stink eye without blinking for like 20 minutes.
I'm not looking at him on purpose. He agrees.
I'll have edits later. I'll redline.
Okay, sounds good.
Mark, stand still. Oh,
All right, awesome. Okay, cool. That is everything. Unless you all have questions, thank you for attending. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye.